Grandma, my parents are sending you to a nursing home today, my 9-year-old granddaughter Lily whispered to me. I simply walked out of the house with no destination. What they didn't know was that I was hiding a $18,000 to $500,000 fortune. What I did next left them in shock. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one with the faded blue fabric that George had bought me for our 20th anniversary, watching my 9-year-old granddaughter Lily carefully arrange her dolls on the coffee table. The afternoon sun streamed through the lace curtains, creating patterns on the worn carpet that had seen better days. Everything seemed so normal, so peaceful. Lily had been staying with me for the weekend while Michael and Heather went to some charity gala midtown. At least, that's what they told me. I suspected it was more about networking than charity, but I kept those thoughts to myself. My son had changed so much since marrying Heather 5 years ago. Grandma Eleanor Lily whispered, glancing toward the hallway as if making sure no one could hear us. Can I tell you a secret? I sat down my knitting and gave her my full attention. At 67, I'd learned that when children want to share secrets, you listen. Of course, sweetheart. What is it? She climbed onto my lap, her small arms wrapping around my neck. Her breath was warm against my ear as she whispered, Mommy and Daddy are going to put you in a nursing home today. I heard them talking on the phone last night. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my chest tighten, my hands instinctively gripping the armrests of my chair. What did you hear, honey? Mommy said you're getting too old to live alone and that it's too expensive to keep taking care of you. Lily's voice was matter of fact, the way children repeat things they don't fully understand. Daddy said the place has visiting hours on Sundays. My mind reeled. I stared at this innocent child who had just delivered news that shattered everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son. Michael had always been distant since George's death 5 years ago, but I never imagined he saw me as such a burden. Are you okay, Grandma? Lily asked, pulling back to look at my face. You look sad. I forced a smile, though my heart was breaking. I'm fine, sweetheart, just thinking. But I wasn't fine. Memories flooded back of Michael as a little boy running to me when he scraped his knee asking me to read him stories before bed. When had that loving child turned into someone who could plot to ship his own mother away, without even telling her I thought about Heather, my daughter-in-law with her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget? She'd made it clear from the beginning that she didn't approve of Michael's overly close relationship with his mother. Every family dinner became a subtle battle with Heather, making comments about how I was set in my ways, or how Michael worried about me too much. We should get you ready, sweetheart, I told Lily gently, moving her off my lap. Your parents will be here soon. As Lily gathered her toys, I walked to my bedroom on unsteady legs. My reflection in the dresser mirror showed a woman who looked every bit of her 67 years. Gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wrinkles mapping years of worry and loss. Clothes that had seen better decades. No wonder they saw me as a burden. I opened my jewelry box, the one George had made for me in his workshop. My fingers found the small key hidden beneath the velvet lining. After George's death, I'd told Michael that his father had left very little money. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The front door opened, and I heard Heather's voice, sharp and impatient. Lily, get your things. We need to go. I closed the jewelry box quickly and walked back to the living room. Michael stood by the door, not meeting my eyes. He'd inherited his father's height, but none of his warmth. Heather checked her phone, clearly eager to leave. Thanks for watching her, Mom, Michael said, his voice strained. We'll talk soon. The way he said it, with that forced casualness, confirmed everything Lily had told me. I kissed my granddaughter goodbye, holding her a little longer than usual. "I love you, Grandma," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart, more than you'll ever know." After they left, I stood in the silence of my small house. The walls seemed to close in around me. Pictures of Michael at various ages stared back at me from every surface. Birthday parties, graduation days, his wedding. Had I been fooling myself all these years, thinking we still had a relationship? I walked to my bedroom and pulled out an old suitcase from under the bed. I packed slowly, deliberately, a few changes of clothes, my medications, George's wedding ring that I still wore on a chain around my neck. At the bottom of the suitcase, I placed a small envelope that contained something Michael had never seen. 20 minutes later, I stood at my front door with my coat and purse. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here waiting for them to come collect me like an unwanted piece of furniture. The afternoon air was crisp as I walked down the street I'd called home for 31 years. Neighbors waved from their porches, unaware that they might be seeing old Eleanor Bennett for the last time. At least the version of Eleanor they thought they knew. I reached the bus stop and sat on the worn bench. When the city bus arrived, I climbed aboard without looking back. The driver, a kind-faced woman about my age, smiled at me. "Where to, honey, Midtown?" I said simply. "Central Trust Bank." As the bus pulled away from my neighborhood, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Not sadness or fear, but a strange sense of liberation. Michael and Heather thought they knew who I was. They thought they could dispose of me quietly, neatly. They had no idea what they just unleashed. The bus rumbled through familiar streets past the grocery store where I'd shopped for decades, past the church where George and I had been married. But I wasn't the helpless old woman they believed me to be. I'd been protecting them from the truth for 5 years, living modestly, letting them think I was barely scraping by. It was time for that to change. When I walked into Central Trust Bank 30 minutes later, I approached the same teller window I'd visited every month for years. But instead of making my usual small deposit, I asked to speak with a manager. "I need to access my safety deposit box," I told the young man in the expensive suit, all of them. The bank manager, a polished man named Mr. Collins, led me through the vault's heavy doors. His demeanor had shifted completely when he saw my account information. The difference in his voice was something I hadn't heard in years. "Mrs. Bennett, we haven't seen you in quite some time," he said, inserting his key alongside mine in the first safety deposit box. "I trust everything has been satisfactory with your accounts." "Perfectly satisfactory," I replied, lifting the metal box from its slot. Inside lay documents that told a story Michael had never known, a truth I'd buried alongside his father. I thought back to that day 5 years ago when Dr. Harris had called with George's test results. Pancreatic cancer stage 4, 6 months if we were lucky. George had gripped my hand in that sterile office and made me promise something. "Don't tell Michael about the patents, Eleanor, not yet. Let him build his own life first." George had been a quiet man, a tinkerer who spent hours in our garage workshop. While I raised Michael and managed our household, George invented small things at first. An improved can opener, a better door hinge, a more efficient sprinkler head. He'd file the patents himself, never expecting much. But then came the automatic pet feeder. It started when our neighbor's dog kept getting into our garbage. George designed a simple mechanism that would dispense food at set times, keeping animals on schedule. He built a prototype in our garage and thought nothing more of it until Pet contacted him. I remembered the day the first royalty check arrived. $12,000 for a single quarter. George had stared at it for an hour before showing it to me. "Eleanor, I think we might have something here." We did have something. Over the next 15 years, George's patents generated steady income that we invested carefully. Real estate in emerging neighborhoods, blue-chip stocks, municipal bonds, nothing flashy, nothing that would attract attention. When Michael graduated college and moved in with Heather, George and I made a decision. We would live simply modestly the same way we always had. Michael needed to learn independence to build his own success without relying on his parents' money. If he knows we're wealthy, he'll never know what he's truly capable of, George had said. And that woman he's dating, she'll never love him for who he is. Heather. Even then, George had seen through her charm. She'd grown up in privilege, and her interest in Michael had seemed to spike when she learned he was an engineer with good prospects. If she'd known about George's patents about the investments that had grown quietly in the background. I shuddered to think what might have happened. After George's diagnosis, the patents continued generating income, but I honored his wishes and kept the secret. Michael was building his career trying to prove himself. I lived on a small portion of the investment income and let the rest accumulate. Now, sitting in the bank's private conference room, with my safety deposit boxes spread before me, I wondered if I'd made the right choice. Mr. Collins had discreetly stepped out to give me privacy. I opened the manila folder that contained my current financial statements. $500,000. The number still shocked me, even though I'd watched it grow slowly over the years. George's automatic pet feeder had spawned a series of related patents, timed dispensers for medications, automated plant watering systems, programmable bird feeders. Each patent generated royalties that I'd reinvested faithfully. My phone buzzed, a text from Michael. "Mom, we need to talk. Are you home?" I stared at the message. So it was beginning. They'd probably already called the nursing home, made arrangements. In their minds, I was probably just sitting in my armchair, waiting helplessly for whatever decision they'd made about my future. I thought about Lily's innocent face the way she'd tried to warn me. That sweet child was the only reason I'd maintained any relationship with Michael and Heather at all. Over the years, I'd watched Heather's true nature emerge. The way she dismissed Michael's concerns about his father's illness. How she'd forgotten to invite me to Lily's birthday parties until the last minute. The subtle ways she'd poisoned Michael against me. "Your mother is so needy." I'd overheard her tell Michael once. "She calls you constantly. You need to set boundaries." But I hadn't called constantly. I'd called maybe once a week, and even then I could hear the impatience in Michael's voice. Heather had been systematically driving a wedge between us, and Michael had been too blind to see it. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Heather. "Eleanor, Michael is worried about you. Please call us back." Worried. Right. They were worried about their timeline being disrupted. Worried that I might somehow complicate their plans. I pulled out another document from the safety deposit box. George's will. The real one that our lawyer had prepared. Michael had never seen this version. The copy I'd shown him after the funeral had been carefully edited, showing only our modest checking account and the house. This will told a different story. It outlined every patent, every investment, every carefully hidden asset. George had left everything to me with instructions that it should eventually go to Michael and Lily. But there had been a condition: only when Eleanor determines that Michael has the wisdom and character to handle such responsibility. I'd been waiting 5 years for that wisdom to emerge. Instead, I'd watched my son become increasingly distant, increasingly influenced by a woman who saw family as an inconvenience. The bank's phone on the conference table rang softly. Mr. Collins' voice came through the intercom. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry to disturb you, but there is a young man here asking about you. Says he's your son." My heart sank. Somehow Michael had figured out where I'd gone. "Tell him I'm in a meeting and cannot be disturbed." "Of course, ma'am." I gathered the documents quickly and placed them back in the safety deposit box, but I kept one item. A small notebook where George had recorded every patent application, every royalty payment, every investment decision. His handwriting filled page after page with the meticulous records of a man building a legacy. On the last page in George's familiar script was a note dated just weeks before his death. "For Eleanor, you'll know when it's time to tell the truth. Trust your instincts. Our grandson deserves better than we had, and Michael deserves the chance to be the man I know he can be. But some lessons can only be learned the hard way. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my purse. Through the conference room's small window, I could see Michael in the bank's main lobby running his hands through his hair in frustration. He was talking to a teller, probably trying to find out what I was doing here. Part of me wanted to walk out there and tell him everything, to explain that his father had been a brilliant inventor, that we'd built a fortune specifically for his and Lily's future, to show him that I wasn't the helpless burden he'd come to see me as. But George's words echoed in my mind. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Michael had made his choice. He'd chosen Heather's influence over his own mother's well-being. He'd chosen to see me as a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be cherished. Now I would make my choice. I gathered my coat and purse, leaving the safety deposit boxes secured in their vault. When I emerged from the conference room, Michael was nowhere to be seen. Collins approached me with a slight smile. "Your son left a few minutes ago," he said. He seemed quite frustrated. "Is there anything else we can help you with today, Mrs. Bennett?" I thought for a moment. "Yes, actually. I'll need to set up some new accounts, and I'll need to speak with someone about estate planning." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Of course, shall I schedule an appointment for later this week?" "No," I said firmly. "Today, I have some important decisions to make." The Parkside Inn wasn't fancy, but it was clean and quiet, and most importantly, it was only 4 miles from Michael's house. From my corner room on the 3rd floor, I could see the neighborhood where I'd raised my son, where my granddaughter was probably wondering why Grandma had disappeared. It had been 2 days since I'd left the bank with a new checkbook and a plan that was still forming in my mind. 2 days of Michael calling my house phone over and over, leaving increasingly frantic messages that I listened to from the hotel's business center. "Mom, where are you? We need to talk." "Heather is really worried about you." I almost laughed at that last part. Heather worried about me the way a cat worries about a mouse, only concerned about when it might escape. I'd spent yesterday meeting with Nancy Liu, the private investigator that Mr. Collins had recommended. Nancy was a small woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and an unassuming manner that probably made people underestimate her. Perfect for what I needed. "I want to know everything about my daughter-in-law's spending habits." I told her daily routines, her friendships, her activities when my son isn't around, and I want to know about their financial situation. The real situation. Nancy had nodded without judgment. "How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to bedrock." Now I sat in my hotel room, waiting for her first report while watching the local news. A story about elder abuse caught my attention, and I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. Is that what I was? An elderly woman being abused by her own family? My phone rang. Nancy's number. "Mrs. Bennett, I have some preliminary information you might find interesting." "What did you find?" "Your son and daughter-in-law are in significant debt. Credit cards maxed out second mortgage on the house, car payments on 2 luxury vehicles they can't afford. But that's not the most concerning part." I gripped the phone tighter. "What is—" "Your daughter-in-law has been researching nursing homes for the past 6 months. Not nice ones. The cheapest facilities she could find, some with serious violations from the state health department." The room seemed to spin around me. 6 months. This hadn't been a sudden decision born of concern for my welfare. This had been a calculated plan. "There's more," Nancy continued. "She's been telling neighbors that you're becoming increasingly confused and difficult to manage, creating a narrative that would justify their decision." I closed my eyes, remembering the strange looks I'd gotten from Mrs. Clark next door last week. The way she'd spoken to me slower and louder than usual, as if I were a child. What about my granddaughter? That's where it gets worse. From what I've observed, the child is largely ignored, left to fend for herself while your daughter-in-law shops and your son works overtime, trying to keep up with their expenses. My heart clenched. Poor Lily, trapped in a house where money mattered more than people. After hanging up with Nancy, I sat staring at the hotel room's beige walls. George had been right to keep our wealth secret, but he'd overestimated Michael's character. My son had grown into someone who could plan to discard his own mother for financial convenience. I opened George's notebook again, running my fingers over his careful handwriting. On one page, he'd written, "The automatic pet feeder patent alone should provide for 3 generations, but money without wisdom is just another burden." Wisdom. That's what Michael lacked, and what Heather had never possessed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. When I opened it, my blood turned cold. "Grandma, are you okay? Mommy says you're sick and had to go to the doctor. I miss you. Love, Lily." They were lying to my granddaughter, making her worry that something was wrong with me while they plotted to institutionalize me. I called Nancy back immediately. "I need you to document everything. I want proof of their financial situation. Proof of how they're treating Lily. Proof of every lie they're telling." "Mrs. Bennett, are you planning legal action?" "I'm planning to protect my granddaughter, whatever that takes." That evening, I drove my rental car through my old neighborhood. The house George and I had shared for 31 years sat dark and empty. Michael's house, 2 streets over, glowed with warm light. I parked across the street and watched. Through the large front window, I could see Heather on her phone gesticulating wildly. Michael sat slumped on the couch, his head in his hands. No sign of Lily. A few minutes later, Heather threw her phone down and stormed out of the room. Michael remained on the couch, not moving. Even from a distance, I could see the defeat in his posture. My phone rang. Michael's number. "Mom, please answer this time. I know you're upset about something, but we can work it out. Heather found some really nice places where you'd be comfortable and safe." "Safe from what?" "From living independently in the house I'd called home for decades, from making my own decisions about my own life." I didn't answer. Instead, I watched as he hung up and threw his own phone aside. A light came on in an upstairs window. Lily's room. I could see her small silhouette moving around, probably getting ready for bed. My heart ached to go to her to tell her that Grandma was fine and that someone was watching out for her. Heather reappeared in the living room, carrying a laptop. She set it on the coffee table and opened it, angling the screen toward Michael. Even from across the street, I could see them looking at what were obviously websites, nursing home websites. They were shopping for my future like they were browsing for a new appliance. Michael pointed at something on the screen and shook his head. Heather pointed at something else more insistent. They were arguing about price. I realized about how cheaply they could dispose of me. I started the car and drove away before I did something I'd regret. Back at the hotel, I called Nancy again. "I need you to accelerate your investigation, and I need you to look into legal options for protecting my granddaughter." "What kind of legal options?" "I want to know what it would take to get custody of her, or at least guaranteed visitation rights that can't be revoked." There was a pause. "Mrs. Bennett, that's a significant step. Are you sure?" I thought about Lily's face when she'd warned me about the nursing home, about the text message saying she missed me about the light in her bedroom window. A little girl probably wondering why the adults in her life kept disappearing. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The next morning brought Nancy's full report. 20 pages of financial records, photographs, and documented conversations that painted a picture of a family in crisis. Michael and Heather owed over $220,000 in various debts. The house I'd helped them buy with a secret gift of $60,000 for the down payment was mortgaged to the hilt. Heather's shopping addiction had spiraled out of control, and Michael was working 72-hour weeks to try to keep them afloat. But the most damning evidence was the timeline Nancy had constructed. The nursing home research had begun immediately after they'd received a property tax notice on my house. They'd realized that my modest home was worth nearly $420,000 in the current market. They weren't just trying to get rid of a burden. They were planning to sell my house to solve their financial problems. The final page of Nancy's report contained information about Lily's daily routine. Up at 6:30, makes her own breakfast while parents sleep in. Walks to school alone because Heather can't be bothered to drive her. Spends afternoons at the neighbor's house because no one is home when school ends. My granddaughter was raising herself. I closed the report and reached for my phone. It was time to call my lawyer. Richard Moore, this is Eleanor Bennett. I need to see you today. It's urgent. Of course, Eleanor. What's this about? I need to protect my granddaughter from her own parents. And I think it's time they learned exactly who they've been planning to throw away. Richard Moore had been George's lawyer for over 20 years, a distinguished man with silver hair and the kind of quiet competence that comes from handling family fortunes for decades. When I walked into his mahogany-paneled office, he stood with the same respect he'd always shown me, but I could see the curiosity in his eyes. Eleanor, I have to admit I'm intrigued by your call. You sounded quite determined. I placed Nancy's investigation report on his desk alongside George's notebook. Richard, I need you to know something that I've kept hidden for 5 years. George didn't leave me nearly as poor as everyone believes. His eyebrows rose slightly, but he remained silent as I opened the notebook to the final tally of our assets. $18, $500, $1,000, I said quietly. That's what George's patents and our investments are worth today. Richard's composure cracked for just a moment. In all his years of handling wealthy clients, I could see that this revelation had caught him completely off guard. Eleanor, I handled George's estate. The will I probated showed what I wanted it to show. The version you filed was real, but it didn't include the patents or the investment accounts. Those were in my name only by George's design. I explained everything. Then George's decision to keep our wealth secret, my 5 years of living modestly while watching Michael build his own life, and now the devastating discovery that my son and daughter-in-law were planning to institutionalize me to access my property. Richard listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he leaned back in his leather chair. What do you want to do, Eleanor? First, I want to protect Lily. I need to know my legal options for ensuring I can see her regularly, regardless of what her parents decide about me. That's tricky. Grandparents' rights vary by state. But if we can demonstrate that you have an established relationship with the child, and that cutting off contact would harm her welfare, I can demonstrate that. 9 years of birthday parties, sleepovers, school events. I have photos, cards, she's made me everything. Good. What else? I took a deep breath. I want to buy the house next to Michael and Heather's, the one with the for sale sign. I want to be close enough to watch over Lily without their permission. Richard made another note. That's certainly within your rights. Anything else? I want to set up a trust fund for Lily that her parents can't touch. Something substantial that will be available when she turns 25. How substantial? 5,500,000. Richard's pen stopped moving. Eleanor, that's nearly a third of your entire estate. Lily is my future, I said. She's the only person in that family who still has a pure heart. I want to make sure she never has to depend on anyone the way they're trying to make me dependent. He nodded slowly. I can draft the trust documents. Is there anything else? I hesitated, then pulled out the most difficult part of my plan. I want to make a new will, one that Michael and Heather will never expect. How so? If something happens to me before Lily turns 18, I want her care and the management of her trust to go to my sister Susan in Washington State. Michael gets nothing until he proves he can be the father and man his daughter deserves. Richard set down his pen entirely. Eleanor, that's a dramatic step. You're essentially disinheriting your only child. No, I'm giving him a chance to earn his inheritance through character instead of birthright. George always said money without wisdom was just another burden. Michael needs to learn wisdom first. And if he never does? I thought about Lily's innocent face, about the lies they were telling her about the nursing homes Heather was researching. Then Lily will inherit everything when she turns 30. At least one person in this family will understand the value of what George built. Richard spent the next hour drafting documents, while I sat in his conference room staring out at the city where I'd spent my entire adult life. It felt surreal to be making decisions about millions of dollars while my son thought I was a penniless burden. My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Mom, please come home. We're all worried sick. Lily keeps asking where you are. The mention of Lily's name made my chest tighten. I typed back, I'm fine, taking some time to think. His response came immediately. Think about what? If this is about the nursing home discussion, we can look at other options. We just want what's best for you. I stared at the message. Even now, he couldn't bring himself to be honest. It wasn't about what was best for me. It was about what was convenient for them. The documents are ready, Richard announced, returning to the conference room with a stack of papers, the trust fund for Lily, the new will. And I've also prepared a power of attorney that ensures no one can make medical or financial decisions for you without your explicit consent. Thank you. I signed each document carefully, my signature sealing a future that Michael couldn't imagine. There's one more thing, Richard said. The house next to your son's. I called the listing agent. The owners are motivated to sell quickly due to a job relocation. They'll accept a cash offer significantly below asking price. How significantly? The asking price is $500,000. They'll take $435,000 for a cash offer that can close within 2 weeks. I didn't hesitate. Make the offer. An hour later, I was the owner of the house at 3 and 12 Oak Avenue, directly next door to my son's family. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were planning to move me into a nursing home while I was buying the house next door. That evening, I drove to my new property with the keys in my hand. It was a charming 2-story colonial with a big front porch and a backyard that connected to Michael's property line. From the upstairs windows, I could see directly into Lily's bedroom. As I stood in the empty living room, I heard voices from next door. Through the thin walls, I could hear Michael and Heather arguing. She's been gone for 4 days, Michael. 4 days. People are starting to ask questions. I know, but what am I supposed to tell them? That my mother disappeared because she found out we were planning to put her in a nursing home? You weren't supposed to let her find out. This is a disaster. I moved closer to the wall, my heart pounding. Maybe we should just drop the whole thing, Michael said, his voice tired. Maybe we can figure out another way to handle our finances. Are you insane? Heather's voice was sharp with anger. Do you know how much debt we have? Your mother's house is our only way out of this mess. If we don't sell it, we're going to lose everything. But if she's really missing, if something happened to her? Nothing happened to her? She's probably staying with some friend trying to make us worry. She'll come back when she gets tired of playing games. There was a pause, then Michael's voice quieter now. What if she doesn't come back? Then we file a missing person report and eventually have her declared incompetent. Either way, we get control of her assets. I stepped back from the wall, my hands shaking. Heather wasn't just planning to institutionalize me. She was prepared to have me declared incompetent if I refused to cooperate. My phone rang, startling me in the empty house. Nancy's number. Mrs. Bennett, I have an update you need to hear immediately. What is it? Your daughter-in-law met with a lawyer today, a lawyer who specializes in elder care and conservatorship proceedings. My blood turned cold. What does that mean? It means they're preparing to have you declared mentally incompetent if you don't comply with their nursing home plan. They're building a case that you're suffering from dementia or some other cognitive decline that makes you unable to care for yourself. I sank into the window seat looking across the yard at the house where my granddaughter was probably doing her homework alone while her parents plotted my legal destruction. There's more, Nancy continued. The lawyer advised them to document instances of your erratic behavior. They're going to start creating a paper trail that paints you as confused and potentially dangerous to yourself. How do you know all this? The lawyer's secretary is my cousin. She's horrified by what she overheard and wanted someone to warn you. I closed my eyes, feeling the full weight of their betrayal. This wasn't just about money anymore. They were prepared to destroy my reputation, my autonomy, my very identity to get what they wanted. Mrs. Bennett, are you still there? Yes, I said quietly. I'm here. And Nancy? Yes. Tomorrow morning, I want you to schedule a meeting with Michael and Heather. Tell them I'm ready to come home and discuss their concerns about my living situation. Are you sure that's wise after what I just told you? I stood up and walked to the window overlooking their backyard. In Lily's bedroom window, I could see my granddaughter's silhouette as she sat at her desk. They think they're dealing with a confused old woman who doesn't understand what's happening to her. I said, it's time they learned exactly who they've been underestimating. I arrived at Michael's house at exactly 200 on Saturday afternoon carrying the same worn purse I'd had for 10 years and wearing the same modest coat that had made Heather wrinkle her nose at family gatherings. To them, I looked like the same helpless woman who had disappeared 5 days ago. They had no idea that the woman standing on their porch now owned the house next door and had 18 to 500,000 in assets they couldn't touch. Michael opened the door before I could knock his face a mixture of relief and barely controlled anger. Mom, thank God. Where have you been? We've been worried sick. The lie came so easily to him that I almost felt sorry for the man he'd become. I needed some time to think, I said, simply stepping into the foyer. The house still smelled like Heather's expensive perfume and the fresh flowers she bought weekly to maintain appearances. Heather appeared from the living room, her smile as artificial as her highlighted hair. Eleanor, we were so frightened something had happened to you. You can't just disappear like that without telling anyone. I'm 67 years old, Heather. I don't need permission to leave my own house. Her smile faltered slightly. Of course not. We just worry about you living alone at your age. Lily came running down the stairs, launching herself into my arms. Grandma, I missed you so much. Mommy said you were sick. I held her tight, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. I'm not sick, sweetheart. I'm perfectly fine. Over Lily's head, I saw Heather and Michael exchange a look. Their first lie had already been exposed. Lily, why don't you go play in your room while the adults talk? Heather said, her voice tighter now. Can I stay with Grandma? No, sweetheart, I said gently. I need to talk to your parents alone, but I'll come say goodbye before I leave. After Lily reluctantly went upstairs, the three of us sat in the living room. I chose George's old recliner, the one Michael had moved here after his father's death. It felt appropriate somehow having George's presence for what was about to unfold. Mom, Michael began, leaning forward with his hands clasped. We need to discuss your living situation. Heather and I have been researching some really nice facilities where you'd have people around. Activities medical care if you need it. You mean nursing homes? Heather stepped in smoothly. Assisted living communities, places designed for active seniors who want to maintain their independence while having support available. I pulled Nancy's investigation report from my purse and set it on the coffee table. You mean places like Sunset Manor, the one with the health code violations, or perhaps Golden Years Care, where the state found evidence of patient neglect? Both of them stared at the document. Michael reached for it, but I held up my hand. Don't touch that yet. We have other things to discuss first. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app, setting it on the table between us. I want to make sure we're all clear about what's being discussed here. Mom, you don't need to record, Michael started. Actually, I do. You see, I know about your financial situation. I know you owe over $220,000 in various debts. I know you've been researching nursing homes for 6 months, not 5 days. And I know you've already spoken to a lawyer about having me declared incompetent. The color drained from Heather's face. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. How do you, Heather began. How do I know? Because unlike what you apparently think, I'm not a senile old woman who can be easily manipulated. I reached into my purse again and pulled out a business card. Nancy Liu, private investigator. Very thorough work. Michael found his voice. You hired a private investigator. Mom, that's paranoid behavior, he stammered. Maybe we should have Dr. Harris take a look at you, Heather added. I laughed, a sound that seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Paranoid Michael, your wife met with an elder care attorney yesterday to discuss having me committed against my will. I'd say my paranoia was perfectly justified. Heather shot to her feet. This is ridiculous. We're trying to help you, and you're treating us like criminals. Sit down, Heather. Something in my tone must have surprised her because she actually obeyed. Now I continued. Let's talk about what you really want. You want to sell my house to pay off your debts. You want me out of the way so you can access what you think is my only asset. That's not... Michael began. I held up my hand again. I'm not finished. You've been lying to Lily, telling her I'm sick when I'm perfectly healthy. You've been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about my mental state, and you've been planning to put me in the cheapest facility you could find while you profit from my property. The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel. But here's what you don't know, I said. Reaching into my purse one final time, I pulled out George's notebook and my bank statements. You don't know who you've really been planning to destroy. I opened the notebook to the first page and began reading aloud. Patent number 874532, Automatic Pet Feeding System, filed by George Bennett, March 15, 2003. Current annual royalties, $910,000. Michael's eyes widened. What are you talking about? I turned the page. Patent number 956498, Programmable Medication Dispenser, filed by George Bennett, August 22, 2008. Current annual royalties, $675,000. Mom, I don't understand. Patent number 9834771, Smart Irrigation Controller, filed by George Bennett, January 4, 2011. Current annual royalties, $945,000. I closed the notebook and opened my bank statement, turning it so they could see the bottom line. Current total assets, $18,500,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Heather's face had gone completely white. Michael stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. That's impossible, Heather whispered. You live in that tiny house. You clip coupons. You buy generic groceries. I live modestly because your father asked me to. He wanted Michael to build his own success without relying on family money. He wanted to see what kind of man his son would become. I looked directly at Michael. Now I know. Mom, if this is real, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let us struggle when you could have helped? I did help. The $60,000 you think came from your father's life insurance for your house down payment? That was me. the inheritance you received when your grandmother died. Also me. I've been quietly supporting you for years, hoping you'd develop the character to handle real responsibility. Heather finally found her voice. If you're so wealthy, then why are you living like a pauper? Because wealth without wisdom is meaningless. Your father understood that. Unfortunately, neither of you do. I stood up, gathering my papers. Here's what's going to happen. I've purchased the house next door to you. I'll be moving in next week. You what? Michael's voice cracked. I'll be close enough to maintain a relationship with Lily, regardless of your wishes. I've also established a $500,000 trust fund for her education and future, which neither of you can touch. Heather looked like she might faint. $500,000. As for the two of you, I continued, you have a choice. You can apologize for your behavior, commit to being better parents to Lily, and perhaps we can rebuild some kind of relationship. Or you can continue down this path, in which case you'll discover that people with $18,000 to $500,000 have very good lawyers. Michael stood up, his hands shaking. Mom, we made a mistake. We were desperate. We didn't know what else to do. If we'd known about Dad's money, if you'd known about the money, you would have been hovering around me for years, waiting for me to die so you could inherit just like you're doing now. Except you were planning to speed up the process. Heather's composure finally snapped. This is insane. You can't just buy the house next door and spy on us. We have rights as parents. Yes, you do. And I have rights as a grandmother. I also have the resources to protect those rights, which you apparently forgot when you were planning to have me declared incompetent. I moved toward the stairs. I'm going to say goodbye to Lily now and Heather. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. If you ever lie to her about me again, if you ever try to poison her against me the way you've poisoned Michael, you'll discover that $18,500,000 can buy a lot of legal trouble for people who threaten my granddaughter's well-being. I climbed the stairs, leaving them sitting in their living room, surrounded by the wreckage of their assumptions about the helpless old woman they'd tried to discard. Lily was in her room, coloring at her desk. She looked up when I knocked on her doorframe. Grandma, are you leaving again? I sat on her bed and patted the space beside me. She climbed up and snuggled against my side. I'm not leaving, sweetheart. I'm moving into the house right next door so I can see you whenever you want. Her eyes lit up. Really? The pretty house with the big porch? Really, and Lily? Yes, if your parents ever tell you that Grandma is sick, or confused, or can't take care of herself, I want you to remember this conversation. I want you to remember that Grandma is perfectly fine and will always be here for you. She nodded seriously. I'll remember. Good girl. Now I need to go take care of some moving arrangements, but I'll see you very soon. As I walked back downstairs, I could hear urgent whispers from the living room. Michael and Heather were hunched over her laptop, probably researching whether what I'd told them was even possible. They were about to learn that it was not only possible, but that their attempt to control me had backfired in ways they couldn't have imagined. I let myself out without saying goodbye to them. They had a lot to think about, and I had a new life to begin. 6 months later, I was sitting on my new front porch, watching Lily practice riding her bicycle in my driveway. The house at 312 Oak Avenue had become everything I'd hoped it would be, a sanctuary where my granddaughter could come whenever she needed refuge from the tension next door. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few weeks after my revelation had been particularly difficult. Michael had tried to apologize, stumbling through conversations about how he'd gotten confused and let financial stress cloud his judgment. Heather had been silent for days, barely speaking to anyone, probably calculating how much money she'd lost when their plan collapsed. But children are resilient, and Lily had adapted quickly to having Grandma next door. She'd come over after school most days, doing her homework at my kitchen table while I prepared snacks. We'd planted a garden together in the backyard, something I'd never had time for when I was working so hard to maintain the illusion of financial struggle. "Grandma, look," Lily called out, pedaling past without holding on to the handlebars. "No hands. I see you, sweetheart. You're getting so good at that." The front door of Michael's house opened, and he walked across the yard toward us. These visits had become routine over the past few months. At first, they'd been awkward attempts at reconciliation. Now they were simply a father checking on his daughter and slowly rebuilding a relationship with his mother. "Hey, Mom," he said, settling into the wicker chair beside mine. "How was Lily today?" "Perfect as always. She got an A on her science project about plant growth, the one we worked on together using our garden." Michael nodded, watching his daughter with a mixture of pride and something that looked like regret. "She seems happier lately. Children thrive when they feel secure and loved without conditions." He winced slightly at the implied criticism, but didn't argue. We'd had several difficult conversations over the past months, and Michael was slowly coming to understand how his marriage had changed him, how Heather's influence had gradually eroded his relationship with his family. "Heather wants to talk to you," he said quietly. I raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "She wants to apologize, really apologize, not just say the words because she thinks she has to." "And you believe her?" Michael sighed, running his hands through his hair in the gesture I remembered from his childhood. "I think she's finally realized what we almost lost, what we almost threw away." Through the window of Michael's house, I could see Heather watching us from the kitchen. She'd lost weight over the past months, and her designer clothes had been replaced with simpler outfits. Whether that was due to financial constraints or a genuine change in priorities remained to be seen. "I'm not opposed to talking with her," I said carefully. "But Michael, you need to understand that trust isn't rebuilt overnight. What you and she plan to do to me changes things permanently." "I know, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but maybe for Lily's sake, we can find a way forward." Lily rode up to the porch, breathless and grinning. "Daddy, did you see me riding with no hands?" "I did, Princess. You're getting really good at that bike." She leaned the bicycle against the porch railing and climbed the steps. "Grandma, can I show Daddy the photo album we made?" "Of course, sweetheart." While Lily ran inside to fetch the album, Michael and I sat in comfortable silence. It wasn't the easy relationship we'd once had, but it was progress. "She's made 3 photo albums since I moved in." I told him, one about our garden, one about our cooking adventures, and one about all the places we want to visit together when she's older. "You're giving her stability, something she wasn't getting at home." "That's changing, though. I've noticed Heather spending more time with her lately." Michael nodded. "The marriage counselor suggested we focus on family activities instead of individual pursuits. It's been eye-opening." Lily returned with a thick album bound in purple construction paper. "This is the one about our garden daddy. Look, here's the first day when we planted seeds, and here's last week when we harvested tomatoes." As she flipped through the pages pointing out each stage of growth, I watched Michael's face. He was seeing his daughter in a way he perhaps hadn't before, not as a responsibility to be managed, but as a person with her own interests and enthusiasm. "This is amazing, Lily. You and Grandma have been busy. We're going to make jam next week with the strawberries. Grandma says we can give some to the neighbors." "That sounds wonderful." After Lily went inside to wash her hands for dinner, Michael turned to me with a serious expression. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "All right. Do you think I can be a good father, really? Or is it too late?" The question caught me off guard. In all our conversations over the past months, Michael had been defensive, apologetic, or resigned. This was the first time he'd asked for my honest assessment. You were a loving child, Michael. You had empathy and kindness. You stood up for other kids who were being bullied. You cried when our dog died and insisted we hold a proper funeral for him. He smiled slightly at the memory. That boy is still inside you somewhere. The question is whether you're willing to let him resurface or whether you're going to let fear and financial pressure continue to drive your decisions. What about Heather? Do you think she can change? I considered the question carefully. I think people can change when they truly want to. But change has to come from within, not from external pressure or consequences. The front door of Michael's house opened again, and this time Heather walked across the yard. She moved slowly as if each step required courage. "Eleanor," she said when she reached the porch, "could I speak with you privately?" I looked at Michael, who nodded and stood up. "I'll go help Lily get ready for dinner." After he left, Heather sat in the chair he'd vacated. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "I owe you an apology," she finally said. "Not the kind I gave before, when I was still hoping to salvage something for myself. A real apology." "I'm listening." "I was raised to believe that financial security was the most important thing in life. My parents divorced when I was 12 because of money problems, and I watched my mother struggle for years afterward. When I met Michael, he seemed stable, responsible, someone who could provide security." She paused, looking across at the house where we could see Michael and Lily in the kitchen window. "But somewhere along the way, I forgot that there's a difference between financial security and greed. I forgot that Michael wasn't just a provider, he was a person. And I completely ignored the fact that you weren't just an obstacle to my plans. You were his mother." "What changed your mind?" I asked. Heather was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily with me, seeing how happy she is here, how she lights up when she talks about our time together. I realized that she'd been so focused on what she wanted for her future that she was ignoring what she needed in the present. "And what does she need?" I asked. "Love without conditions, attention without distractions, adults who put her well-being ahead of their own convenience." I studied Heather's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation, but her eyes were clear, and her voice held a steadiness I'd never heard before. "The nursing home plan," I said. "That was your idea." "Yes, and I'm ashamed of that. I convinced myself that it was practical, that it made financial sense. But the truth is, I saw you as competition for Michael's attention and resources. I wanted you out of the way, and now I understand that family isn't a zero-sum game. Your relationship with Michael and Lily doesn't diminish mine, it enriches theirs, which enriches mine." Lily appeared in the doorway. "Grandma, Daddy says dinner is ready. Can you eat with us?" I looked at Heather, who nodded slightly. "I'd like that, sweetheart." As we walked across the yard to Michael's house, Heather said quietly, "I don't expect forgiveness right away. I know I have to earn it, but I hope you'll give me the chance to try." "We'll see," I replied. Actions speak louder than words. Dinner was a revelation. Instead of the tense surface-level conversations I remembered from before we talked about Lily's school projects, her friends, her dreams of becoming a veterinarian, Michael and Heather listened to her, really listened, asking follow-up questions and showing genuine interest in her answers. After dinner, Lily insisted on showing her parents the photo albums we'd made. As she narrated each picture, I watched the family dynamic slowly shift. They were learning to see each other clearly, perhaps, for the first time. Later, as I prepared to leave, Michael walked me to the door. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know that I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately, about the choices he made, the man he was. And I think I understand now why he kept the patent secret. He was trying to teach me something about earning things rather than inheriting them. What do you think you've learned?" Michael looked back toward the living room where Heather was helping Lily organize her photo albums. That the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They have to be built day by day through trust and respect and genuine care for each other. Your father would be proud to hear you say that. Do you think there's hope for us, for our family? I thought about George's words in his notebook. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way. Michael had certainly learned his lessons the hard way, but he was learning them. There's always hope, Michael, as long as people are willing to do the work of becoming better. Walking back to my house that evening, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The front porch light was on, welcoming me home to a place that was truly mine. In my mailbox was a hand-drawn card from Lily. Thank you for being the best grandma ever. Inside the house, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in George's chair, which I'd moved from storage. His notebook lay open on the side table to the page where he'd written about wisdom and wealth. You were right, George, I said aloud. Money without wisdom is just another burden, but wisdom without the power to protect the people you love is just wishful thinking. The house next door was quiet now. A family learning to rebuild itself on a foundation of honesty instead of desperation. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be setbacks. But for the first time in 6 years, I believed there was hope. My phone buzzed with a text from Lily. Good night, Grandma. I love you. I smiled and typed back, I love you too, sweetheart. Sweet dreams. Outside my window, the two houses sat side by side in the darkness, connected now not just by proximity, but by the slow, careful work of rebuilding trust. George's legacy wasn't just the money he'd left behind. It was the wisdom to know when to reveal it and how to use it to protect what truly mattered. Family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about choice, about choosing to love and protect each other even when it wasn't easy. And sometimes it was about having the strength to set boundaries that force the people you love to become better versions of themselves. I was no longer the helpless woman they'd tried to discard. I was Eleanor Grant, guardian of my granddaughter's future and keeper of my late husband's wisdom. And I was finally, truly home. Now I'm curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.